Welcome to Transformational Leadership, the podcast for leaders building high-performance organizations and teams. In every episode, you will hear from executives and transformation experts who've led with vision, executed under pressure, and delivered real, scalable, and impactful results. You'll hear practical insights and leadership stories from executives who've driven change, delivering transformation, and consistently winning in highly complex environments. No fluff, just frameworks, lessons, and stories from the front lines of leadership. If you're serious about building competitive impact through people, you're in the right place. Here is your host, Jeff Harnois.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Transformational Leadership. My guest today is Jennifer Kozel, founder and CEO of the Gravara Group. Today, we're going to be talking with Jennifer about her use of horses in executive development, a fascinating topic. We'll also talk about how Jennifer approaches solving for difficult employees and negative impacts that they can sometimes have on organizations and teams. And we'll talk about a transformational initiative that Jennifer led in a 100-year-old high growth company focusing on the HR function itself. So with that, everybody, please welcome Jennifer Kozel. Jennifer, it is phenomenal to have you here today. Welcome to the show.
Jeff, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Awesome. It's wonderful to have you. And in some of our previous conversations about equine and the use of horses in executive development, it is a fascinating topic to me. You founded the Gravara Group recently to provide executive leadership for the HR function in a fractional capacity. And as I mentioned, you've got equine as part of your suite and your tools. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, absolutely. It's one of the unique and exciting offerings that a lot of executive teams are drawn to. Um, a lot of times it gets to be pretty old going and sitting in conference rooms trying to brainstorm or whiteboard, and sometimes they just need some experiential learning and activity to get the juices flowing to have those aha moments. In fact, I can give you a story if you'd like to hear. I can share an example of how it works.
I would love to hear a real live example of this.
Sure. So I'm going to call this executive Tasha. Tasha is from a Fortune 50 company, and her team, very high performing, high profile, big impact projects that they had to deliver on. Millions and millions of dollars at stake if their team is not working well together. And she was noticing that the collaboration wasn't there and morale was down, that the team was feeling burnt out and was not performing as well as they could. And so she reached out and said, "Hey, I want to do this executive retreat. I want to bring my team out and figure out what's going on because I need to fix it. I need to fix it fast, and we need to produce. So when can we come?" So she brought her team out. And in this exercise that I'll share, it's called a haltering exercise, where you simply put a halter on a horse. Seems easy enough, right? Well, her team went, and she was last to go. So when she went into the arena, there's this large stallion in there just waiting by himself for her. Now, she has horse experience, so it should have been a very fundamental, very basic task for her. She walked in, holding the halter, and walked straight towards him. And as soon as she got within arm's reach, the horse took off running. And she was like, "Ugh," a little embarrassed. And she waited till he stopped and approached him again. Well, she approached him. He stood quiet until she got within arm's reach, and he took off again, kicking up dirt and dust. And obviously, her frustration was mounting. And this happened numerous times over and over while her team was watching.
But
Finally, she couldn't
Jennifer,
hide. Yeah,
Jennifer, before you go on, I'm having a visual of her getting close and the horse taking off. And it just makes me think about, real life transformation and that sometimes the target moves and you get really close and then it slips away from you, and the frustration and then the fact that you have to start over. So that allegory here is an image in my mind while you're telling me your story.
Thank you so much for sharing that because that actually is the beauty of this work. It's metaphorical and perfectly applies to what we're going through and experiencing in the workplace. So you're exactly on target with that. And so, yes, she got frustrated. She couldn't hide it anymore. She threw the halter on the ground, put her hands on her hips, and looked at me. She's like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know why he's running away from me. And so if you think of why she brought her team there in the first place, right? And so it was just a coaching moment. And I said, why don't you explain to me what you think is going on? And she described trying to approach him to where he could see her, to where he felt safe with her. And she didn't understand why he was running off. And so I asked her to clarify, what do you mean by you want him to see you? Well, this horse only had one eye. He actually had it surgically removed years before. And so he was putting his blind side towards her. And she was deliberately trying to get around and position herself where he could see her. And he was saying, no, this is the side I want. And so that's what was going on. And so she explained it, we probed, and she's a smart, smart lady, and she stood there for a second pondering. It clicked. She picked up that halter, she went straight towards him, towards his blind side, put the halter on easily, led him to the center. She looked at me and smiled like she won the lottery, and I said, "Tell me what's going on." And she said, "He was trying to show me his way, and I couldn't see it because I wanted it done my way."
Oh my gosh, what
Right?
a great story, Jennifer.
I call it the blind spot exercise because that's exactly what it was, the blind spot, right?
I love this story. I love everything about it because exactly the conclusion you came to. Often in transformation, we can have the clearest objective. We can have the target in sight. We can know exactly what we want. And if we're not at least aware of the potentiality of having those blind spots, it's sort of, the unconscious incompetence. We don't know what we don't know. And being open to that, to be able to say, okay, there are going to be things that come up. We can be frustrated by them, or we can realize that it's just information that may be, on the cusp of revealing what's actually holding us back. I just love this story. I'll bet you've got a bunch of stories in the equine space.
I do, but I do wanna share 2 weeks later, she called me up and she said, "Jennifer, I gotta tell you, I spent that weekend reassessing the workload." She said, "I was overtaxing my A players. I was putting all the high stakes, high pressure stuff on them, and I wasn't giving anyone else on the team a chance to step up." She said, "That was my blind spot." Exactly like what I experienced in the arena. She said, "I've completely transformed how I assign work and how I listen to my people, and I challenge the assumptions I'm making about their ability." And she's like, "I've already seen a difference in my team, all because of that." So, pretty cool.
I love everything about this story, Jennifer. And for me, the concept of using these experiential kinds of exercises out in the world. I know, a parallel might be a ropes course. I don't know if you've ever done one of those. Those are
Mhm.
similar in terms of giving experiences that often lead to very profound insights that often then lead into, really, really deep and meaningful transformation. Thanks so much for sharing that story.
Absolutely. It's that paradigm shift that makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, yeah. You've got me rethinking about how I approach my business and my practice just from that story. Very inspirational. Thank you. So let's transition over to the second part of our talk through. You were working with an organization that had, we'll use the classic category of a difficult employee, or difficult employee issues. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about your approach to that?
Sure. There's one that really stands out for me because I was transformed just as much as the team and this employee. And so I will share high level. Employee I'll call Tom, and Tom had a very full life, a very complex life with personal issues that came up frequently with his family, health related, all kinds of crises, homeowner related, parent related, you name it. This poor guy's been through it. And it showed up in how he worked. And so he was often not where he was supposed to be, coming in late, leaving early, working few hours, not taking on a lot of the workload. And it was starting to put a lot of stress on his teammates who didn't trust that he would follow through with their clients when they weren't in the office. And additionally, it had a negative impact on his leaders over the years. In fact, numerous had been reassigned off of the team as a result of conflicts with this particular individual. So I was called in probably because of my HR expertise, and I was put as a leader over this team. And everything started out great the first few months, but when I started noticing those patterns emerge, I sat him down to coach him through the importance of pulling his weight and performing in a way that meets expectations. As you can imagine, it didn't go too well, and, it started a bit of a battle, and it involved attorneys. He would frequently have his, attorney on speed dial and put him on speakerphone and wouldn't speak to me in private, always had to have a third party, and it just escalated over a few months, and I thought, "Gosh, this with all my years in HR and all the experience I have, this one is different." This one was bigger and different, and it started to have a physical toll on me. One of the symptoms was severe migraines. And so, um, this is something that you may or may not believe, but I'm gonna share the story anyway because it led me to the transformation. And I remember the day I stumbled my way to a chiropractor's office, desperate for relief from this headache. And on my way out, I met this old woman, and she was at the checkout window, and she's like, "Do you have a migraine?" And I'm like, standing there in pain. She said, "I can help you." And I thought, I don't know what you can do, but I'm open to anything because I'm desperate at this point. And I followed her out to her car. She pulled a chair out of the back seat and had me recline back in this chair under this tree in the parking lot. And I thought, "Oh, this is crazy, but you know what? I'm gonna lean back and just close my eyes for a minute because this feels good." And she started talking about energy pulling. I had no idea what she was talking about, but she put her fingers on my scalp and said, "Tell me what's troubling you." And I started telling her about Tom and the accusations being made, the tone, the postures, the legal stuff, the third party requirements, all the things. And as I'm talking, she said, "I want you to imagine a bright light." So I'm laying there with my eyes closed, imagining this bright light. She said, "Like the sun. This is a healing energy. This is the divine loving energy from which we all come." She's imagine it. I'm imagining it. She's imagine it bathing you, imagining it bathing me. She says, "Now imagine Tom. Put him in front of that light." And she said, "He'll look like a shadow, the figure in front of this light." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Now pull that light through him to you." Okay. So I'm pulling the light through him to me. This went on for I don't know how long. But when it was all over, I felt much better. I felt full and complete. I felt loved and valued. And I didn't have this headache anymore. I never got her name. I don't know where she came from. In fact, I went back into the chiropractor's office a week later and asked. They don't know who she is or didn't know anyone that fit the description. But back to the story. So the next day I come into work and I approach Tom and I imagine him with that light and ask him how he's doing, if there's anything I could do for him. And when he turned and looked at me, he went, like he was surprised or something. And I was like, genuinely curious about him and pouring that light into him. This went on for 3 days. He's like, no, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. Thank you for asking. On the third day, he said, can I talk to you? And I thought, oh boy, here we go. I said, do you want me to call HR? Do you want your attorney? And he's like, no, no, just you in your office. And I said, are you sure you don't want a third party? He said, no, just you. I said, okay, here we go. So we went in and he said, I just want to thank you. And I said, for what? And he said, I want to thank you for looking at me the way you've been looking at me the last few days. He said, I don't know how to describe it, but I feel valued and I feel loved as a human being. He said, I just want to thank you because what you've been through over the last few months, I don't know anyone that would have endured it or come back and looked at me the way you are. So thank you. What? So I share that story because not only did we kind of mend fences and learn how to overcome things I was pretty hurt and angry about, but we actually became advocates for one another. And it was truly amazing and transformational. And it taught me about the importance of staying curious about people, staying grounded, not jumping to conclusions or allowing things that are happening that cause noise and stress to negatively impact you physically, right? Staying in your sole purpose.
Mhm. Gosh, I'll tell you, Jennifer, there are several things that are coming up for me listening to you tell that story. And when I think about it through the transformation lens, the first transformation in your story was you. You were the one who transformed. You transformed your orientation, you transformed your attitude, and ultimately then you transformed your approach. And what was the transformation? You transformed from seeing Tom as an adversary or a problem that needed to be solved to seeing him as a human and as a person. And it turns out that that transformation is exactly what he needed to then transform his behavior. And from a leadership perspective, this is something that we work on with executives on a regular basis, especially when my leaders are technical or, engineering type leaders where they think of every problem in a specific way that has very little, humanity in it. And that's often the transformation that's needed, and it's like, stop thinking of your team as a resource, stop thinking of your team as a tool, stop thinking of your team as an ends to a means, and start thinking about them as people and connecting with them on that level. And this sounds simple to prescribe, but it's often a lot of work to be able to sort of, again, transform into that headspace. But once you do that, your ability to problem solve in ways that are, typically not instinctive, maybe even counterintuitive, it opens up all kinds of really, really interesting possibilities. What a great story. What a phenomenal story, Jennifer. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, I'm glad you appreciate it, and you're spot on about the human part of our business. And, I've got this saying that the best way out or through is within. And so if you start within, everything else kind of solves itself. And same thing happened with the team, right? As soon as the team saw Tom and I shift and all of a sudden showing mutual respect and mutual care, all of their suspicion of Tom seemed to go away too, right? And they started trusting him and started building relationships with him. They didn't like what they were seeing before, and we didn't need to have some department meeting to explain anything, right? They saw it for themselves and the shift happened for itself.
Isn't that incredible? Yeah, this is a true transformation success story because not only did you address and solve the immediate problem, but the ripple effect of that solutioning throughout the organization and then ultimately leading to what I can only imagine was a significantly better working environment for everyone.
Yeah,
Phenomenal.
exactly.
Jennifer, really, really well done. And isn't it
The band-aids
interesting?
don't work.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of the reasons why we use psychometrics, at iBridged. We really want people to have a much better understanding of the psychological drivers around how people connect, how they collaborate, how they communicate, how they show up under stress or duress, how they approach decision making and what information is valuable to them. And then how all of those things lead to behaviors that can be read. We can understand who people are based on how people are through the behavioral model. And we spend a lot of time helping, executive leaders see that coding. I call it the human cheat code, because when you understand those drivers, you can adapt and adopt, certain characteristics that allow you to connect more quickly and deeply. But I love this aspect of your story. What one other thing that's coming up for me, this is just my own brain at work. There's a saying, and I don't know where it comes from. I don't know the origin of it, but when the student is ready, the teacher will come, is the phrase. When the student is ready, the teacher will come. And that's what happened for you. You were ready for a completely new experience. And the woman showed up and she was there and took you through a journey that, you maybe you thought was going to be super esoteric or whatever. But I think the thing, the underlying theme there, Jennifer, that's really on my mind is your ability and willingness to be open to it. And I know that that was driven by the pain of the migraines, but your ability to just say, "Listen, I'm ready to try anything right now to solve that problem." And you were open to it and you received that input and then were able to use it. What a cool, cool story.
Well, I was at my capacity, right? The problem seemed bigger than my ability. And following the experience, my capacity expanded. And so that's the beauty of transformation, right? You expand every time you're able to forge through an obstacle or overcome a hardship. You become more equipped and can handle more things, and your capacity expands. And then you become more valuable to the organization.
Let me ask you a question. That's a really, really interesting point. Did your capacity expand? In other words, some sort of external input here to expand your capacity, like, swapping out a memory chip in a computer? Or did your capacity just get unlocked?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it, right? Because we all are capable of anything, but it's our own beliefs that restrict our capacity. And so the experience, right, it changes your beliefs, and then your beliefs unlock your capacity. Spot
Yeah.
on. Yeah.
When I think about coaching, and I ask the question because, my sort of philosophical approach to this is part of our job as executive coaches is to unlock the capacity that's there. In another way of saying it is, we often see people's abilities that exceed their own perception and their own limitations. And part of the joy that comes in from doing what we do is helping people then, find the key that unlocks that capacity that, from my opinion was there all along. And we have typically we have a tendency to see it before they do. And
Absolutely.
when I think about the work we do, when that happens, it's pure joy and it is complete gratification in the work we do.
Yes, 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 all day long, right? Because you can tell somebody, I believe in you, you are capable of anything, and none of that matters until they see it. So the magic of coaching is creating that space and guiding somebody through that self discovery or the experience to go, oh, wow, okay, I can do this,
Yeah.
right? I have more power than I thought.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It's like a nuclear energy source from my perspective. It is unending and really, really fueling, how we approach our work. Well, that is awesome. As an HR executive and you spent, gosh, you spent how many years at Home Depot as an HR in HR?
22 in total.
Yeah.
Yes.
There you probably have a ton of stories there. Getting back to the fractional work that you do, and the transformation work that you do, you were working in a 100-year-old company that was in a high growth mode. And I mention the word 100-year-old company because oftentimes we see organizations, where I'm out here in Silicon Valley and we have lots of startups and there's lots of new and, they're still finding their identity and they're still building their traditions and, their artifacts and all of that. 100-year-old companies are usually um, much more difficult to transform. There's lots of old thinking. Not that there's anything wrong with old, but it's often not aligned with the contemporary environment. And so you had an organization that was sort of in that state where lots of history, lots of institutional history, lots of time to work out processes and procedures and policies and all of that culture was probably firmly set by the time you arrived in the organization, and yet they were struggling from an HR perspective. Tell us a little bit about how you approached that problem.
Sure. Well, it was post-pandemic. So, as with most companies, this company pulled back too, pulled back resources, pulled back on people, kind of hit that trough plan to go, all right, we got to sustain and get through this. And we don't know how long it's going to be. And what happened was there was a boom, right? And there was a lot of business pressure to say, hey, we actually need you and we need you to grow. And so it just went into a rapid growth time and they created a CHRO role for me to come in and kind of head up that transformation. And you're right, it's important to respect the traditions and the culture in place, especially for a company that has that kind of tenure, right? And so the transformation started behind the scenes with HR operations, right? Trying to get job architecture in place and writing SOPs and updating employment handbooks and doing the thing, creating landing pages to make it easier for self-service and to find information, um, all of those things. And then introducing a recognition platform so that you can start the drip method into the culture. Like, this is what we celebrate. We celebrate employees who are living the values and cheering each other on. And so the points and the gifts and the prizes, and they get to shout out each other's accomplishments, which drove a lot of the positive employee culture. I brought in HR generalists for the first time in the company after 100 years, to handle employee relations, which is par for the course, right? I mean, the company was about 1,100 employees when I got there. And just 3 years later, when I left to start my own company, they were well over 2,400. And so, doubled in revenue, more than doubled in headcount. So we had to grow a learning component. We had to build a powerhouse of talent acquisition, right? I mean, to hire that many people, but then also work on retention at the same time. You can't just forget retention and culture while you're hiring because then it becomes a revolving door, right? Just all the things. So I built out the strategy and really focused on leader development because that's what drives employee experience. Really, it's your boss. You hear the saying all the time, people don't leave companies, they leave bosses, right? And so if we're promoting supervisors and managers too early and not investing in their growth, well, it's writing on the wall for what the story is gonna be for retention, right? And so really focusing on that, building out a university and a leadership program, with multiple levels. So it's not just a one and done, including psychometrics and helping people understand how to know themselves, how to relate to other people, how to relate to their team, how to stay back and go, let me be an inquiry before I start shooting out my directives and orders for what people need to do. And that was a lot of the work. And that was also a lot of the cause of employee relations issues. So to really dial in on leader development first is, I think, the most important crux of any strategy when you're talking about transformation.
Hmm. Couple of things are coming up for me, and it's just my curiosity. You're building an HR function that sounds like, in the 100-year history of the company had previously not been invested in, that there wasn't really an HR presence. And, where my brain goes on this is organizations that don't have integrated HR are often a little bit of a Wild West approach to business and employee engagement and management and ER issues. There's no real process, there's no real discipline. There's a lot of shooting from the hip and a lot of reactionary types of responses when there are issues. So that often is how before I ask the rest of my question, was that similar to the state of the business when you came in?
It's almost like you were there, Jeff. Yes, so we had to put in succession planning, talent management, talent planning. Everything had to be established, and it started too with bringing in a set of core competencies that is expected from everyone, and using it as a baseline too. Getting common language and building that infrastructure, it's what holds the company up, right? Without it, the company can't grow and sustain.
And so where my question is going with that foundation is, even though it is exactly the right thing and maybe even the necessary thing and probably the thing that enables the organization to grow like it did, I would expect there would be a lot of organizational resistance to having, HR come in and have a role in the organization. And there's a phrase that often gets tossed around. It's like the adults are in charge now, and I could see, putting a formal HR presence and operation in an organization that didn't previously have one, it might feel a little bit like that, like the adults are in charge now. What kind of resistance did you face in the organization, and how did you approach that?
Yes, you're absolutely correct. I mean, if people haven't experienced HR as a partner, then it can sometimes feel like an invasion a little bit, right? Who are you to come tell me what to do kind of
Yeah.
thing.
It's
And
been it's
so
been
it's just,
working it's been working and you haven't been here.
yeah, in their mind, it is working, right? What they didn't know is the cost to the company for not having HR as a strategic partner and having the infrastructure in place. But it all comes down to building relationships, which is why I think it's pretty cool we ended up starting our conversation today talking about building relationships. Is essentially what Tasha did in the arena with the horse with her team. She built a relationship with her team while she was figuring out how to build a relationship with the horse. In the employee relations issue, right? Like, we were working on building a relationship between a manager and an employee, and the impact was a ripple effect across the entire organization because that relationship was built, right? And so, in this final example that we're talking about, same thing is you got to kind of build credibility and trust through relationship building first. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how right you are about anything because it's not gonna make sense and you're not gonna have buy-in or cooperation. So it is really key to just focus in on the decision makers and make sure that they understood HR is there for you, not against you. And what you need is where we're gonna focus, right? Where your biggest pain points are, that's what we're gonna solve for, and use that as the modality and the way forward.
Really good, really good. Yeah, I mean, it always comes back down to the relationship and the connections we built and the advocacy we build, not only for ourselves, but for each other, in transformation-based initiatives, because when you're managing change, not having the advocacy, makes it difficult, sort of at best, and at worst, it renders the entire initiative ineffective.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely something I learned, about communication is just the importance of understanding. your audience perspective and their needs, right? And then catering any vision or activity or communication around that as the central focus point. What is it that you need? Where are you coming from? Okay, now let me walk you towards the vision, right? And you got to meet people where they're at and fully seek to understand where are they, what are their pain points, and then you're there to serve. As HR, you're there to serve, right?
Yeah.
So,
One of the things that's coming up for me in this story, and I'm actually sort of thinking about it more than I probably should be while we're talking, is one of the programs that we administer is called Work of Leaders. And Work of Leaders focuses on 3 key operational disciplines, and you've touched on all of them in your story, which is why I'm bringing it up. The first one is vision. The second one is alignment, and the third one is execution. Vision, alignment, and execution, and you really do need all 3. And what's interesting about it is when we go work with a team, it's ironic and kind of funny at the same time. We assess teams on those 3 elements, vision, alignment, and execution, and what we typically find is teams are good at 2 of the 3, and they don't know they're not good at the 3rd one. And so when we go in and we assess them, we're able to sort of show them, you've got great ideas, you've got great vision, and then you're so excited about it, you're jumping right into execution and you skip the alignment step. You don't have buy-in from the people who need to buy in. You don't have advocacy in the organization that you need. You're so excited about delivering the execution component that you skip that step completely. Or another common configuration is, we see people in their values and they talk about executional excellence. Well, yeah, okay, good, right? You're really focused on getting it right. And you probably have people who are aligned with you on getting it right, but nobody's got any new great ideas, which in some organizations is fine. You don't have to innovate. But if there's a needed component of innovation, not having that vision element in place can really, really hurt you. And so we see those combinations in teams and, listening back to your story, you had to sort of check off each one of those, to have the successful transformation that you did.
yes, definitely. It's great insight you provide there, Jeff, because absolutely. And as you were talking, I'm imagining, I kind of put myself back there going, yep, yep, yep. It, yes, execution was absolutely a priority, and it's that middle piece of really connecting, communicating, and aligning that needed help, and that's where HR really can be a great partner. It's certainly where executive coaching can come in, which is why I love executive coaching so much, right? I mean, you're able to help people be better versions of themselves by the self-discovery that unfolds through just asking powerful questions and helping shift a mindset to look at things differently.
Well, that's really interesting for me too. I think again, as we talked about earlier in the conversation, this idea of seeing potential in others that they don't see for themselves and then helping them unlock it is one thing. But a really close cousin to that is we often see dynamics in operations that people who own those operations don't see. And that's the beauty of having a third party pair of eyes come in. And so we're able to often highlight things that the people who are in, again, in that ownership role, leaders of organizations often don't see because they're too deep into it. And so I love the combination of being able to help the individuals unlock, especially at the leadership level, but also then helping them see things that weren't obvious to them.
Yeah. Because what happens? It's what happened with Tasha and her team. The team starts solving the problems that you're wrapped up in, and you don't even need to pay attention to them because when you get yourself aligned and you align your message and you align expectations, the team takes care of the rest. It's pretty awesome.
Jennifer, I have to tell you, I have thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. My sense is that Listeners and viewers of this particular episode are going to have a very rich experience. There's a lot to take away here and a lot to think about. I really appreciate that. I have a couple of questions for you, just to kind of get to know you a little bit better as a person. One of my favorite questions to ask, and I'll just tell you, there's an intellectual curiosity here, but there's also just a human connection component to this question. And that is, what was the best piece of advice you were given and didn't take but wish you had?
Oh, well, that one, I think I illustrated in the second story is the self-care being important. I've always been a driver. Um, and I remember people that slow down, smell the roses. I'm like, no, like I had something to prove or I had somewhere to go that couldn't wait or, I just didn't understand. No, no, I'm the exception. I can handle it. I'm tough. I was in the military. I got this. I got that. Right. Like I don't need to rest. And then if you don't, what happens is your body steps in and says, "Oh, you're gonna slow down." And so that's advice that I got along the way and I disregarded and shouldn't have. But I'm glad I figured it out now, and I'm really trying to do a better job, especially now that I truly control my time and my workload as an entrepreneur at this point. And that is making sure I make time for self-reflection, for restoration, for rest. And that's where I get the most creative and the answers come that I otherwise wouldn't have allowed to flow through me. So it's pretty powerful stuff when you do take a pause and take care of yourself.
I
Put that
love that.
first.
I love that. I'll tell you what I love about that story. A lot of, a lot of my approach to coaching comes from personal experiences and problems that I needed to solve for and what I learned from those experiences. And I certainly encourage, my consultants to do the same. Bring your whole self to the engagement. And, as you solve for problems and as you learn, be able to share that, I think of it as wisdom, be able to share that as wisdom. So I'm really glad to get that piece of wisdom from you. You mentioned time in the service. You were in the Navy,
Sure was, yes. I was a hospital corpsman in the Navy.
a hospital corpsman.
Mhm.
Gosh, what's interesting to me about that is when you came out of the Navy, you didn't stay in the medical field. Is that right?
That's right. But, you know, I I used to struggle with that. I remember being 27 years old going, "Well, how do I explain this transition? I'm in retail and I'm a manager now and then in HR. How does it all fit?" But it all fits, right? Because my purpose, my life purpose is about being a servant leader, right? And serving others. And so, what do you do in the medical field? What do you do in HR? What do you do as
Mhm.
a leader? You
Yeah.
serve others. And
Yeah.
so, that's been very meaningful for me throughout my life.
Yeah, I mean, what's coming up for me is, as a corpsman, it really is about at times even, giving life-saving care. Not always, sometimes it's just care, helping people improve. And there is a portion of HR that is exactly that. And I think of it from 2 perspectives. The first one is giving care back to the organization and the people who serve the organization, but also teaching leaders how to do that. Yeah, what a awesome experience. And then what advice would you give? You have such an interesting background from the military into retail, into HR, into the executive suite. What advice would you give somebody coming into the workforce today that I guess what I'm thinking about is what piece of success advice would you give to really to anyone coming into the workforce? What would you say to them to ensure they were going to be successful? What should they focus on? What should they learn? What should they do? What experiences should they have? What do you think?
Well, there's lots of questions that just started rolling off your tongue there. I thought I had the answer till you had a bunch more. Because as you were talking, really the biggest thing that stood out for me is to say worry serves no purpose, right? It just makes you ill. And so it is, if you're a worrier, it's hard to just be like, well, I can't just stop worrying. That's who I am. But you can in a way where you replace or rewire how you talk to yourself. And that worry is you telling yourself stories. Well, what if this or what if that or what if this, right? Those are stories that get you wound up and stressed. And so the advice is not to get yourself wound up to where you're stressing and worrying and destroying your physical and mental health. And so the answer to that, what do? Is you talk to yourself kindly, that you put your own health and well being as a priority. And just like the story, my second story about kind of standing in your truth and being centered and trying to stay aligned with your true purpose, that gives you strength that comes from within or above or both to where you are your most powerful self. And that's where magic happens. When you're worrying, you're off kilter. You're not your best self. And then you can't possibly perform in the way that you want to perform. So worrying destroys you. And I would say, don't worry, be happy. But, I don't want to be cliche. But now in my older years, I'm understanding like there is some real wisdom in that to find your happiness and make sure you have a dose of that every day. And then if you can increase to higher doses every day to where truly you're feeling gratitude and you're feeling happiness and you start attracting more of that, right? Energy follows your intention and your self-talk. So it comes down to, I guess, if I were to sum it up, talk to yourself kindly. It's
I
about your
love that.
self-talk.
Beautiful, beautiful advice. Awesome. Jennifer, I'm so grateful to have you on our show today. I loved the bits of wisdom and the stories are really compelling. I appreciate you so much. Thanks for joining us today.
Jeff, thank you. It was an honor. It was lots of fun.
And how should people, if people want to reach you and connect with you, what's the best way for them to be able to find you?
They can find me on my website, which is thegravaragroup.com. Gravara. It comes from gravitas. And so their website is there, and my email is Jennifer at thegravaragroup.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, so connect with me. I think it's Coach Jen or JHK. We'll post it, I guess. And yeah, I'd love to connect with you all.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jennifer. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk soon.
You too. Thank you, Jeff.
All right, take care.
The Transformational Leadership podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes vision, action, diagnostics, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, be sure to let us know in the comments. We'd love you to join the conversation and help us transform the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are transforming organizations, leaders, and teams. In the meantime, be sure to like, subscribe, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.